Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. School bells are ringing across the Commonwealth as a new year is underway. Always an exciting time. And education is always an important topic in a state that has had its challenges over the years. Kentucky's Interim Education Commissioner, Dr. Wayne Lewis, is with us today. Lewis has more than 15 years' experience in public education and a variety of positions, including public schools, higher education, and in state government. He's a native of New Orleans who left Louisiana in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. We'll touch on a lot of topics today: back to school, changing qualifications for teachers, school security, and new standards for high school graduates. We welcome Interim Education Commissioner Dr. Wayne Lewis to Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's find out a little bit more about your background and what brought you to this position, a very pivotal position here in Kentucky. And so let's do that. You grew up in New Orleans?
Yes, sir. I'm a New Orleans native. Grew up in New Orleans, high school, did my undergraduate studies at Loyola University in New Orleans, and then went on to the University of Akron in Ohio to pursue my master's degree. Met my wife in Ohio. We got married after my master's degree. We both moved back down to Louisiana, where we both taught in the public schools, New Orleans public schools, Jefferson County public schools for her, and then St. Charles Parish public schools for me. We were there until Hurricane Katrina in 2005. We had recently bought our first home, maybe less than 2 months. When Hurricane Katrina came, we had 12 feet of water in our home. So we lost our home and relocated to Raleigh, North Carolina, simply because that was the first place we both got jobs teaching, in the Wake County Public Schools. So we were there for a couple years, had great experiences in Wake County, loved North Carolina. I pursued my PhD at North Carolina State University, earned that in educational research and policy analysis, and then came to the University of Kentucky in 2009 to teach in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies.
So here we go. Well, I mean, Hurricane Katrina then really was a dividing line in your life,
absolutely,
right? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, everything in our lives is really before Katrina and after Katrina. You know, even these years later, we'll think back to a book or a pair of shoes, something, you know, seemingly trivial that, you know, most folks would think, oh, I have this or I have that, and you have to remember, oh, that was before Katrina.
Well, so you wanted to be a teacher, and you were, and have been, and you still are. But now you're serving in this very important role as the Interim Commissioner of Education in Kentucky. And there's no indication there's any kind of search underway. Are you interested in serving in that post long term?
I am.
Yeah, so you're making lots of school visits. You're out there talking to those schools. What are you finding as you go across Kentucky?
You know, I love this state, and I love its people. And one of the things I find as I travel the state is that, you know, there are teachers, parents, communities that want the absolute best for their kids. This is the, you know, back to school time, so there's a lot of excitement in the air, a lot of excitement about possibilities, which makes it one of my favorite times of the year. And so I treasure the opportunity to get to know more and more partners, communities, parents, teachers, as we talk about what a vision for public education in Kentucky could be, as we talk about raising the standard, raising the bar, and achieving learning at levels that we've not done in the past.
What are your priorities? What drives you in this position, your philosophy toward public schools?
Yeah, so I'm a very outcomes oriented leader, Bill. Outcomes matter to me. Standardized assessment outcomes, those are one of the indicators that I watch a whole lot. But what's even more important to me is what happens to young people as they exit our system. And so at the high school level, you know, we've tackled high school graduation requirements pretty early because, you know, we have a 90% high school graduation rate in Kentucky. It's one of the highest in the country, 7th in the country last time we checked, top 5 in the South. What that has not translated to for us in Kentucky is additional young people matriculating into post-secondary institutions. So we send on average about 60% of our graduates into post-secondary education after they finish high school, whereas the rest of the country on average sends about 70%. So even with that high school graduation rate way up there, we're not sending enough kids to post-secondary education. And even more troubling, of the kids that we are sending to post-secondary education, only a fraction of them are being successful, meaning only a fraction of those kids are actually exiting post-secondary education with a credential, whether that be a certificate, a diploma, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree. And so we've very intentionally taken a look at the Kentucky high school diploma. Making the diploma meaningful is a top priority for me.
What should that diploma mean? What should they be qualified and ready to do when they receive that high school diploma?
You know, first and foremost, and you use the term, it's the term that we use, they need to be ready to do what's next in their lives. Whether that's going to a 4-year institution, a 2-year institution, going into the workforce, going into the military, we need to ensure that young people are in fact ready. I'll say something to you that I say across the state, and I get strange looks when I say it, but from a very basic standpoint, we have to ensure that the Kentucky high school diploma means that kids can read. Because the reality is we can't assure that today. We know that we graduate kids with Kentucky high school diplomas across this Commonwealth who struggle with basic reading, who struggle with basic mathematics. At a foundation level, that has to change. And then on the end, as they exit, we have to do a better job of ensuring that kids are ready for post-secondary education, ready for the workforce. The numbers as they currently stand, we have that 90% high school graduation rate. But of the kids who we graduate, we deem 65% of them to be ready for college or career.
So, Mr. Commissioner, what's going wrong? I mean, why is it that we are in this situation where we have that many who can't read with comprehension, who can't complete these basic tasks you're speaking of, and who are not ready to go the next step?
You know, we could be here all day in terms of talking about the factors that contribute to why we struggle in the way that we have. I think what is key, though, is we have to get to the place very quickly where we hold ourselves accountable for outcomes. We have to get to the place where we say we will no longer be okay with simply moving kids on and just getting them to the diploma, getting them a diploma, if we can't assure that kids can read, can do basic math, and that they have a shot at being successful when they get into post-secondary education. If we can't do that, then we've simply set them up for failure.
There was a life skills law that's been passed by the legislature that talks about what we often call the soft skills.
Yes, right.
Showing up on time, being prepared to do work when you take a job, and that sort of thing. Is that an important element of this as well?
It's a really important element. So the General Assembly passed legislation in this last session aimed at essential skills, right? Those skills that we've traditionally called soft skills, the ones that you just listed. And we have incorporated those in terms of what we should be exposing and expecting of our young people. Now, to be fair, we have quite a few districts across the state that were already incorporating these types of things. But we think it is important at the state level that we expect all of our districts are making sure that students are exposed to these things, that they're making sure that students can demonstrate these skills, because regardless of what your academic competence is or your skill level, if you can't show up a second day, if you're not drug-free, you won't be able to keep a job.
So as the high school graduation standards change, are you working right now to, is that a work in progress?
It is. So the Kentucky Board of Education at its August meeting had a first reading of a regulation that would change Kentucky's minimum high school graduation standards. There will be a special called meeting in September when the board will discuss the proposal a little bit more, and then the hope is that in October the board would approve a final version of what the revised high school graduation standards would look like.
How do you think this will be accepted as you roll out these expectations for teachers, for the schools, the students, even the parents to get on board with this?
You know, largely the proposal has been greeted, has been received very well. Largely, we find in conversations with educators, whether it be teachers, superintendents, principals, parents, community members, that people understand that we do have to expect more of ourselves, of our system, of our kids. Because if we don't, we're setting our kids up to not be able to compete in the workforce. to not be able to compete, to get into post-secondary institutions and be successful, and nobody wants that.
Are you concerned that other states are, running off and leaving Kentucky behind?
Well, Kentucky is moving as well. Kentucky has made major moves since the early 1990s. What we have to keep in mind is as we are moving, as we're taking steps to move forward, so is the rest of the country. So is the rest of the world. And so if we intend to even maintain the position that we have in terms of ranking, our competitiveness on a national or international level, we have to move. And if we want to improve our ranking, our competitiveness, we have to move faster than everybody else is moving.
How challenging is it to move Kentucky in an equitable way? That is to say that we have districts that are wealthy, we have in metropolitan areas, and we have some other areas that are much poorer, and within the metropolitan areas we have districts as well that don't have the resources that some of the wealthier districts might have. How do we, as is required under the Kentucky Education Reform Act, make sure that there is equal access to education?
Resources will continually be an issue, and I will continue to advocate on behalf of Kentucky schools for additional resources, strategic investments that we need to make in our K-12 education system. One of the things that cannot get lost in this conversation, however, though, is that additional resources alone do not fix this problem. It is not the reality that we are graduating kids who can't read and do basic math simply because we don't have the resources. And so coupled with this conversation about resources has to be fundamental changes in our system, changes in accountability. Because here's the reality, Bill. We have districts that are very well resourced, that spend a lot more per pupil, that are not providing the types of opportunities for kids and getting the results for kids as districts that spend a whole lot less and have a lot fewer resources.
And not so veiled reference perhaps to Jefferson County. We'll get to that in just a little bit. And we're with Dr. Wayne Lewis, who's Kentucky's Interim Education Commissioner. We're back with a lot more questions, new standards for teachers, and more when we come back on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're glad you're with us today as we visit with Kentucky's Interim Education Commissioner, Dr. Wayne Lewis, who's told us on this program he'd like to do this long term. You're enjoying the job so far.
I am. It's an incredible opportunity.
You got to be an incredible challenge as well, right?
It is. I don't sleep as much as I used to.
Let's talk about teacher standards. They are changing. Teachers will no longer be required to get a master's degree early in their careers. The Kentucky Education Profession Standards Board, which has now been moved under the Department of Education, made that ruling this week. Now this is part of an reorganization of the commission, the Department of Education that you're wanting to see.
Right. So let me clarify just a little bit. I think there's been a little bit of misperception in terms of what has happened. The Education Professional Standards Board, prior to the governor's executive order on August 1st, existed in Kentucky law as both a board and an agency. What the governor's executive order did was eliminated the agency portion of the Professional Standards Board and established a new office within the Kentucky Department of Education to serve as staff to that board. Now, that board is comprised of members who are appointed by the governor. It continues to be an independent board that is comprised of members appointed by the governor. That board makes its own decisions. It continues to have responsibility for promulgating policy, for ensuring that educator standards for educator licensure, schools of education accreditation, none of those functions for the Professional Standards Board have changed. The only thing that's changed is rather than it having its own independent agency as staff, the Kentucky Department of Education now serves as staff to that that board.
And it's under your oversight, right?
The board is not under my oversight. Okay. That's the misconception. And it's actually reversed. We work for the board. The board makes decisions. We serve as staff for the board.
The Kentucky Education Association's president called it counterintuitive for the state to, as they said, lower the standards for teachers. First of all, do you agree that that is lowering the standards by not requiring that master's degree be earned early?
Well, I think her standards are, her statement is really unfortunate on lots of different levels. There's nothing in terms of what the Professional Standards Board has done that lowers the standards for Kentucky teachers. What we have in place right now is a rank system for Kentucky teachers. Most teachers who enter the profession enter with a bachelor's degree and no years of experience. That's a rank 3. They move to a rank 2, usually with earning a master's degree, an approved master's degree, or with a continuing education option. And then they earn rank 1, usually with an additional education program, an additional 30 credit hours. In regulation was the requirement that teachers could not stay at rank 3, that they had to move to rank 2, which most teachers do by earning a master's degree. And so what the Professional Standards Board did was waive the requirement that teachers must move to rank 2, which essentially in operation practically means teachers are not required to earn a master's degree. Now, one of the things that's been lost in that conversation, Bill, is this recommendation came first and foremost from educators. It came, that's right, it came from a group of teachers, administrators, leaders in education, and the decision was made by the Professional Standards Board. Most folks don't know, because this hasn't been covered, that the Professional Standards Board, the vast majority of its members are educators, K-12 teachers, administrators, principals, and so you have a recommendation that came from a group of educators that a group of educators made. We supported it, we recommended it as the Department of Education. The reason they made it, Bill, quite simply is when you look at the research literature on the tie between having a master's degree and teacher effectiveness, you don't see a relationship. And so while teachers will continue to be rewarded with the rank system and earn more for earning a master's degree as they move up and advance their education, without some tie to the effectiveness of what teachers do with earning a master's degree, the board saw no reason to continue to impose that mandate on teachers, require that teachers earn this master's degree in order to keep their license when it doesn't change the quality of what happens in the classroom for kids.
So a teacher may go their entire career now at this point with a 4-year degree, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And, no. and what you're saying is, with all confidence, that will serve the students just fine.
Well, what I'm saying is, what we should be focused on is things we can do to improve the effectiveness of teachers.
Was it simply the outcome that was the catalyst for this, or does it give schools some flexibility? Well,
there's a few things. First and foremost for us is students. If we do not see the need, the rationale of imposing this incredibly expensive burden on teachers, that's what teachers tell us, when it does not change their effectiveness in the classroom. If they want to pursue it, great, we'll reward it. The second piece is, these are usually early career teachers, young people who are coming into the profession, sometimes with tremendous college debt from undergraduate degrees, and we are requiring that they take on $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in additional debt oftentimes to earn a master's degree, which again is not tied, which the research literature tells us, to their effectiveness in the classroom. This becomes a particularly interesting issue in our border school districts as well, where they're competing with Tennessee, West Virginia, Indiana, Virginia for teachers. And mind you, most states across the country do not have this requirement. And so they're competing with states where teachers who are effective can remain in their states and continue to thrive professionally without earning a master's degree, where if they cross the state line, they'd have to take on that debt to earn a master's.
So you bristle at headlines or opinion pieces that say Kentucky has lowered its standards for teachers.
I absolutely do. And you know, the real unfortunate part about this is that there's only one organization that I've heard that's been critical of this move, the Kentucky Education Association. You can go back, this is well documented, 3 or 4 days even before the Professional Standards Board voted on this, that organization said they had no position on it. And then after we do it, it's been characterized as an attack on public education.
I think they have said they officially have no position, but that there is the concern that it sends the wrong message.
It absolutely doesn't. It sends the message that we are focused, laser focused, on what is best for students. if anybody can show us a practice, a requirement that leads to greater effectiveness of teachers in the classroom, leads to greater student learning, if we think we can incorporate that into what we do into Kentucky, I'll absolutely consider such a requirement. But I see no need to impose such an incredibly expensive mandate on teachers when it doesn't move the needle on what we should be focusing on, which is student learning.
Dr. Wayne Lewis is Kentucky's Interim Education Commissioner. Let's talk about school safety. We'll also talk a little bit about athletics before we go on Kentucky Newsmakers. Stay with us. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're visiting with the Interim Kentucky Education Commissioner, Dr. Wayne Lewis. We've learned a lot about his background and his positions on numerous things. Also, with the start of a brand new school year, which he says he enjoys, districts have a renewed emphasis on school safety. And there was, of course, that very unfortunate school shooting at Marshall County earlier this year. Since then, there have been hundreds of threats to Kentucky schools, also unfortunate. Is it appropriate that districts address these safety concerns in the way they see fit, or should there be some absolute standards from Frankfurt on and guidance on how to deal with safety?
You know, I think at the state level, it's always incumbent upon us to provide resources to districts, to set minimum expectations for districts in terms of whether that's school safety or student learning, providing a safe environment for our kids. That's important. But the specifics of how districts approach keeping their kids safe, that, like, to be honest, most decisions, I think, are best made at the district level. You see some districts that have already been incredibly creative with their approach to both hardening the target as well as caring for the social and emotional needs of kids to keep them safe.
Fayette County's approach is comprehensive. They enacted a tax that will raise more than $13 million for a wide-ranging security plan that includes additional counselors as well as surveillance equipment and metal detectors. So if that's what Fayette County wants to do, you're on board.
Right. If that's what the people of Fayette County decide is appropriate, I am supportive of that. Now, as I'll say, to be clear, as Interim Education Commissioner, it is not my place to weigh into that decision. I'm not even a resident of Fayette County, and so I won't weigh in that. But I am excited that Fayette County, like many of our other districts, is taking that as a priority and wants to address school safety.
What do you say to districts who can't afford that kind of effort, who couldn't pass a nickel tax to deal with security?
You know, some of the things that we find to be most effective in terms of keeping our kids safe don't cost a whole lot of money. So one of the top pieces of advice or suggestions that comes from the Kentucky Center for School Safety is that we simply lock the doors, right? We still have some districts across the Commonwealth that don't lock the doors. There are other considerations like at entrances, making those controlled entryways where you're checking with people before they come in. Thinking about glass entryways, protective film that can harden the target. And then attuning to the social and emotional well-being of kids is a big part as well. Ensuring that every kid that's in the building has at least one adult that they feel comfortable talking with, that they have a relationship with. Because where we're able to thwart a lot of these things, Bill, is when students are comfortable enough to tell adults what's going on in their own lives or something that they hear that's going on with another student.
So the bond really needs to be
absolutely,
yeah,
for lots of reasons.
How do you balance athletics and academics? How important are athletics in your view for schools?
I think athletics are important. Athletics are on a number of different fronts in terms of you know, getting kids out, active, keeping kids healthy. I think kids learn a lot through athletics as well, through learning to work as a team, collaborating with each other, getting to know each other on a different level oftentimes than what they get to know each other in the classroom. The relationships that are built and cemented between coaches and athletes, I think, is incredibly powerful and pays dividends even in the classroom. And then when you think about the middle school and high school level, there's a lot of culture and cohesiveness that comes around supporting a team as well. And so I think athletics are an important part of what we do in education.
You have been been called a charter school advocate. The state legislature passed the framework to allow them, but not a penny to fund them. Do you see that changing going forward?
I will continue to be an advocate for high-quality charter schools as an additional education option for parents in our state. We'll continue conversations with the General Assembly in the hopes that they will cement a funding mechanism for public charter schools in the state. Now, to be clear, the ask was never putting any additional money in the budget. What's needed and what's been asked for is a funding mechanism for the same dollars that we appropriate for public education. If a child decides or a parent decides that they want their kid to go to a public charter school, for those dollars to follow that kid to that school.
Which opponents see as shifting away from the public schools.
Right. This is what opponents leave out of that argument, is the only way a child ever attends a public charter school is if their parent decides to send them to a public charter school. Which is the same thing. If a parent decides to take his or her kid out of a Fayette County public school and send them to a Jessamine County school, then those dollars follow the kid to Jessamine County. I don't think we would accuse Jessamine County of shifting dollars out of Fayette County's budget.
I'm down to about a minute. Here in central and eastern Kentucky, we've watched the Jefferson County public school situation. You decided early on a move to have a state takeover. Now there are settlement meetings going on and indications that there will be less than full assertion of state control at some point. Is that correct?
Well, as of now, Bill, we are scheduled to begin a hearing before the Kentucky Board of Education on September 10th. As I've said throughout this process, and I initiated this in mid-July, talks of what a settlement could look like with Jefferson County Public Schools. We will entertain proposals that they send to us. If we can come to a settlement agreement, which I think would be in the best interest of all parties, we're happy to do that.
We thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Hope you'll come again.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning, and you make it a good week ahead.